Hey guys, off the record, I'm going to talk about Rising of a Shield Hero. Now, don't worry, I didn't spend money on this. Someone else bought it for me for my birthday, and to them I say thank you. But they bought it on the idea that it was kind of the best isekai, which is something true for a certain definition of it. It is the best of what it is, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And by that I mean the modern generation of isekai that's honestly mostly trash. Some people say it started with Sword Art Online, but I don't think Sword Art Online counts. It is stuck in another world, but it's a digital world, and honestly, I need to talk about it in its own sense because there's like two types. There's things that pay lip service to isekai, and things that are isekai. Things that pay lip service to isekai don't bring in the real world with them, really. There's one called Knights something, and it's about this guy who loved Gundams. He gets pushed in front of a train or something stupid like that, and then he uh, gets reincarnated into this magical world with magical knight mechas, and he just loves it there, and he's the best engineer ever. Nothing he ever does from one step to the other it to be isekai. The kid could have been born, and then later it was revealed that it was an isekai, but that would mean the author had to give up the isekai tag, which is very popular and very lucrative. I don't. I don't excuse it. I view that as very insulting. It's very angering to me. That just because it's like you didn't need to do that. The kid could have just been a genius mech designer in the magical world. Like it was already there. You could have done it. Um, but really, then there's real isekai. Now, the best of it, objectively, is the 12 Kingdoms. I'll talk about that book later. Honestly, this first book is the only one you ever need. There's a couple others which I've read, but they're not as good. Partially because they focus on the fantasy world that is lovingly crafted and absolutely amazing, and not on the isekai aspects of it that I find far more interesting, just because of how it is. And honestly, um, I'm not going to say it's like super original or anything like that. It's a simple lost in another world. Dorothy, blah blah, house kills a witch, blah. Um, that a lot of other places have, but honestly, it's much better than anything puts out. It had like a 52 something, 48 something anime that I've got somewhere here, um, and it was pretty decent. They added another character who didn't need to be there, but whatever. It was interesting and added contrast to a story, and I think other novels added her in or something. I don't know. Like I said, I only really care about the first one. Now, I've got the first one of Rising of a Shield Hero, whereas this was old hotness. Like a finely aged cougar who still runs through the bars at night, and the young sailors, they come calling. Because of milkshakes. Ooh, nutritious, full of calories, keeps you up all night. But Rising of the Shield Hero is modern, and it is trash. Most isekai is trash in the modern era. In fact, I actually haven't found a single isekai show that I've enjoyed that has not somehow subverted the isekai genre in some way, except for No Game No Life, which plays it straight but has different rules than the most isekai. I do not consider it a subversion of isekai, partially because it was at the beginning of the phase, and it doesn't actually subvert the thing that makes isekai special. That is to say that you have someone from our modern world trapped in a different world that is alien. That's very important to me. Alien to the one that they're in now. I'm not worried. I feel weird about Sword Art Online because it's not alien to the main characters. Most of the people who were there wanted to be there until it got murdery. Whereas Log Horizon is more of a true example of what Sword Art Online should have been if the author had any skill. Rising of the Shield Hero is playing it straight. It is another world. They have all the mindset of the your typical social outcast otaku. And then we get to where people start seeing that it's saying that it's good. That is, everyone shits on the protagonist and nobody cares about him at first. But we're going to keep ourselves to this novel. Just because to expand it out to where he gains his powers and becomes the full man would be outside what I really want to talk about. And that's sort of how they treat the main character. Um, One of the things that pulp writers like to say, and they share it around, that Raymond Chandler famously said, if things are going a little slow, just have a guy enter the room with a gun. uh, you know, like they're talking about something. There's exposition. Yeah, it's boring. Here's thug number 8 with a gun, and he's gonna whack him, and there's a fight over the gun, and maybe the dame smashes his head over with a vase. Like it's interesting. It provides intrigue, ideas. Um, See, I got that in one try this time. So where Shield Hero kind of fails to hit it for me is that there's no guy with a gun coming in. Instead, there's emotional and physical abuse on the main character that isn't necessarily justified by the story or the events. You see, the four heroes, three of them do not experience conflict. If all four experienced conflict, even if they had relatively the same plots, it would be much more believable, understandable. But no, the king doesn't like the shield hero because they're racist or something. It's bad, metaphor wise, and blah blah. Something happens. The princess betrays him, takes all his money, and accuses him of rape, and that would be a really great storyline. Seriously. Anything can be a good storyline, but you have to treat it with the gravitas and respect that it deserves. And while they treat it with a certain amount of gravity, it doesn't go anywhere. And it doesn't permanently stop the hero. It's, in fact, more of a slight speed bump. Like you're going down like 35 in a 25 an hour apartment complex and you just hit the speed bump. And you're boom, and but then you're driving smooth after. You get me? So the conflicts that he engages in, very few of them have long-term consequences that truly matter. They have consequences, I want to say, in the next day, 2 days, maybe a week. But after that, there's no more consequences for it. And other actions he does have consequences that are honestly much more positive than the original set. Do you believe I'm doing this off of a script? I hope you don't, because I'm not. After those original set of consequences, those negative experiences, the princess who's all sorts of terrible, um, everything starts going his way, but slowly. He is indestructible mostly. Modern monsters can't hurt him, so he just does whatever and eventually levels up and he gets his various systems. Now, don't get me wrong. He's different than like the real trashy shows, and something something Master of Ragnarok trash something something ugh. Terrible waifus something something cell phone. It's kind of hard to really describe it, but just because they're throwing tragedy and misfortune at him doesn't make him a good character. He's still as cynical and as beaten down as he ever was, and nothing ever really comes of it. At the end, he fights and loses to, I believe, the Shield Hero? Maybe? Spear Hero, excuse me. And there's this great emotional scene where he realizes Raftalia is all grown up, which I don't really understand why they needed to really do it, except that they wanted a token lolly character, which, is him slowly building up a terrible monster girl harem. Um, and it just keeps going and going and going, and it gets better for him, better for him, better for him. And in fact, I don't ever hear of misfortune happening to him after this book. After the first book, everything goes right. So in other words, all the author did was take the typical isekai genres of the harem, the easily gotten harem. I'll repeat. I'll make you understand. My fingers look so fat on the camera. What's wrong? Uh, Not that I could ever play piano, but it's sausage fingers. Um, what was I talking about? Right. So that he started him at a lower level, but fundamentally, he rises pretty much instantly, rising of a shield hero. And he keeps rising. And whatever blocks are in his place are not the emotional or legal or whatever blocks that were put into him originally, but rather it's him coming into his own. He doesn't really change his character too much from the cynicism that he started out with and only got worse over time. And then it got maybe to his original level, maybe a little bit higher. And that's a very satisfying arc, taken out of context. But it doesn't really, again, do anything if we know that there's nothing going to stop him. There's no, like, hmm, let's compare him to John C. Wright's Swan Knight son. Now, that is Gil Swan. What is his last name? Anyway, he he's a very powerful, very strong kind of guy. He goes through training. He has a very low starting point because his mother is alone and did not wed his father, which has real consequences for those with elvish blood, as well as for people. Like, look up some statistics on that stuff. Like, it's real nasty. Single motherhood is like shooting a guy in his Achilles tendon and then telling him to run a 5 kilometer race. Run, not walk. Uh, a lot of bad things can happen, but he avoids them because his mother is an assiduous Christian and instills in him moral standards that bite him in the butt because modern society doesn't really appreciate those, even though it makes him a very good man. He doesn't give in to despair, but rather he seeks out to become a knight, even if he can't really do it right. And he goes through training. He goes through incredible hardship, physical and mental, and spiritual and emotional, to come out a knight. He is a completed man. To compare it to Rising of the Shield Hero, all the same things happen. He trains, he has emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual dangers and problems that he overcomes, and he gathers allies and love interests and everything else along the way. Like, they have incredibly similar story by beat. But his cynical attitude, as well as not the threat that Gil could die tragically, and he almost does multiple times in believable ways, die tragically on his quest and never know his father and never save humanity from the elves, but rather he's going to win. Rising of a Shield Hero. He doesn't have the baggage that Gil has, and the writer isn't good enough to instill in us a sense of tension, which could have been solved in several different ways. First, he could have faced execution for supposedly ravaging the princess. Now, it may sound strange to you, because he is one of the heroes destined to kill the Dark Lord, but instead that makes him more capable of um, sort of escaping, fighting his way out. A prison break. Prison breaks are a lot of fun. He should have done that using his skills, and it would be a great way to show off how the skill tree works, which is actually fascinating. The world building in the magic powers is absolutely top notch. Like, you could learn a lot from Rising of a Shield Hero when it comes to magical powers. But anyway, I'm going too long, so I need to hurry this up. He then breaks Raftalia out of prison while almost dying or almost getting wounded. This allows us to avoid the slave implications of Raftalia's backstory, as well, because she has a lot of issues. Her parents were killed. She could kill somebody and then be slated for execution. It's not that hard to do. Or maybe there's somebody who's a mentor type, like what Gil had, who's able to break him out of prison, and give him the leg up he needs to get started, as well as keep Raftalia around because she's grateful for him for saving her life. It's not that hard. Um, but that would keep a certain amount of reasonable tension that would allow the author to play around with certain ideas and certain character designs while keeping the relatively same beats of the story. The guy who helps him could turn out to be that friendly blacksmith, so on and so forth. You can keep all the same things of racism against demi-humans, which I think is just the dumbest name. Dumbest name. Like, demi-humans, come on. Then we have a whole bunch of different things you could do with it, like just to rival up the tension. The fight scene with the spear hero was actually very well done, but I don't believe he would have died in that. Like when Gil, who we know is the hero, he's got all these different books that he's in this book too. It's not like he doesn't survive, but he has a whole lot of tension applied to his fights because of who he's fighting. He fights Bigfoot. He fights multiple Bigfoots. He fights knights. He has to go through hellish training. He has to deal with the fact that the elves think he's not worth the shit that they just walked on because they thought it'd be funny to walk on some shit. Like that's how elves work. He doesn't have a bloodline because he's a bastard. Etc. Etc. You know, there's just a thousand different things that is done in Swan Knight's Son that makes the fights worth it. He doesn't fight the police, and instead they lock him up. And these elves try to get him with some police procedural BS, and they're using people who have despaired, who would, probably kill themselves if the thought came to it. So they just do whatever the elves say. They don't care. At least it doesn't hurt as bad. Like there's all these different things that they do that ratchets up the tension, makes it believable that Gil could die to the Bigfoot. And in fact, he loses one of his fights to the Bigfoot, who literally tosses him off to his death. And the only reason he survived is that his mermaid dragged his bleeding body, 1 ounce of blood from exsanguination, to her giant medical mastermind father, who we already established in book 1 was a medical mastermind, just so you know. Um, who basically says, "Get him out of here," but here's some magic elixir to keep him at least breathing, um, etc., etc. Like the only reason he survives actually is because her breathing cap is explicit power is to prevent people dying underwater. So that's it. That's the only thing keeping him alive. There's nothing like that in Shield Hero. It's a world with magic, but everything feels unmagical. There's no tension to the fight scenes. There's no risk of him dying. He, like in the third book of Swan Knight's Son, he goes to get his head chopped off willingly. He doesn't want to do it really, but he's willing enough to, put his head on the block. Um, and it was full of tension. He has an archangel who literally says to him, "I'm not going to answer whether you live or die, kid. Just go do it. Enough for tomorrow are its own cares." And he's like, but this is, I'm going to die. "Enough for tomorrow are their own cares." Oh, okay. And he accepts it. And he has to fight temptation. Temptation is as much of a problem to Gil as the swords of his enemies. Rising of the Shield Hero gives into whatever he wants. He gives into despair. He gives into his need for a companion. He gives into his hate. He's brought out of it at the end, but really it's still there. It's not purely cured. He just sees Raftalia as a person compared to a tool. And he already saw her as a person, so it wasn't really that much of a break. Honestly, there's a lot of problems with Shield Hero that are good by beat, but are bad by execution. And sometime I'm going to talk about that in greater detail in a more scripted story. But I'm sorry, video, because it's a very important concept. There's no bad beats. There are bad executions, story ideas. No bad story ideas, but bad execution. There we go. That's a better way to say it. There's also kind of bad usage of story ideas, but good execution. But that's harder to describe. That's mostly broken man behind me. But anyway, I don't really recommend Rising of the Shield Hero to anyone. And honestly, it's like a 5 to me. But I really need to start reviewing things I don't enjoy, but I find some value in. Just so you guys know why I love Galaxy's Edge so much. It does everything right. And even the things that it do wrong are so minor it doesn't hurt the original purpose of the story, which is to entertain me. Rising of the Shield Hero is kind of like it's masturbatory sometimes, even. If you're a disaffected loner, you will love this book because you will see yourself in whatever his name is, Shield Hero. Because he's a disaffected loner, just like you. He has problems with women, just like you. And he takes things you want that you might not necessarily get, or even have the balls to do if you could. Let's be real. A lot of incels probably would do it. They buy these dolls or whatever, they buy a human too. And I'm not saying it to hate on incels, I pity them. But think about it. Every single step of something that a disaffected otaku, loner, whatever, people who read these books wants, he's providing them, but unhealthily. And unlike Gil, who turns into a hero and a knight and a more of a man than most men, this guy stays mostly the same, gets what he wants, and eventually becomes the most powerful thing around. If only those people had believed in him at first. And how insidious is that idea? It's beautiful, and I'll talk about it some more in another video. But it's so dangerous for a mind to fall into that trap. Links for things I do will be down in the doobly-doo below. I will not be including a link to Shield Hero because I do not wish you to punish yourself or jack yourself off with this book. Honestly, the illustrations aren't even that good compared to 12 Kingdoms or what's the other one I like? Goblin Slayer. I'll also talk about Goblin Slayer sometime because it is better. Anyway, weaponize autism. You're all wonderful. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.